Not everything can be great. Not everything is that perfect show that wins all the awards, that leaves the entire audience satisfied, and not everything will give you that feeling when you're leaving the theatre feeling like, yes, I am happy to have paid an enormous amount of money, in most cases, to have seen that show. So I do think it's important to have this conversation. Because even though my favourite thing to do on YouTube is to come on here and tell you about shows that I loved, sometimes a show is bad. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my Stagey YouTube channel. If you are meeting me for the first time, hello! My name is Mickey Joe and I'm obsessed with all things theatre. I'm an independent theatre critic and a content creator based here in the UK, and in the last year, in 2022, I saw over 150 shows, excluding the dozens that I saw at the Edinburgh Fringe. Now, in my most recent video on my channel, I was rounding up my 15 favourite shows of the year. Amazing shows, stuff that moved me and impressed me, and has gone on to amazing critical success. And today we're going to be talking about the other end of the spectrum, because I do think it's important that we look at those shows as well. You know, there are things that we can learn from a show that doesn't do as well, or a show that maybe made some mistakes or wasn't as successful. But also, by including shows in this list, this is not me saying this is a show that failed in its objectives. This is a show that did not resonate with me. Interestingly, the Times, in their theatre roundup of 2022, included shows both that Clive Davis really loved and shows that he did not like. And one of his least enjoyed shows of the year was one of my favourites. It was one of the ones I talked about in my top 15 video. So that just goes to show you how subjective theatre can be. One person's favourite thing ever is someone else's nightmare, and it can be polarizing. A lot of the shows I will talk about today are beloved by someone, maybe many people, maybe you, but not by me. So while you may be thinking this kind of a video is not super responsible at a time when theatres are in a precarious financial position and audiences have yet to fully return to the theatre and they need our support, the best way to get audiences to come back to the theatre when ticket prices are rising, when we are living through a cost of living crisis, when everyone is having to be more careful with money that they spend, is to put on the best shows that we can to leave audiences satisfied and to not leave anyone feeling like they have wasted their money. And that's a big part of why I talk about theatre on my channel here as well. I feel like that is another really important side of reviewing, to let people know if they are going to be spending their money on something they feel will be worth it. So disclaimer aside, here are 10 shows that disappointed me in 2022. Now, I'm calling these shows that disappointed me and not the worst shows, because I'm excluding a few things I saw at the Edinburgh Fringe, purely because those are really small-scale productions, and I feel like it's punching down for me to criticise something that is on that kind of a level at a fringe festival when everyone's just trying to, you know, utilise their creativity and put something onto a stage in a very challenging time. But also, in almost all of these instances, I really was very hopeful that I was going to enjoy these shows. You know, I'm optimistic every time I go to the theatre that I'm going to have a great time, that I'm going to find something to love about these shows. Like I told you, I saw over 150 shows this year, and I really had to look through to figure out what absolutely disappointed me. And these were the only 10 real disappointments that I managed to put together. The other thing I will say is they are not in any kind of an order, because I didn't want to rank them. Again, that felt super crass. I'm going to be telling you about them in chronological order of when I saw them, talking through the year. So we begin in the very early days of January 2022, when I took a trip to the National Theatre to see a musical I was very excited about. The show was, of course, called Hex. So between this being a new musical at the National Theatre, which is not something we've seen an awful lot of during Rufus Norris's tenure as the artistic director, and the fact that Rosalie Craig was going to be starring in it, fresh off of having starred as Bobby in the gender-swapped West End revival of Company, I was really excited about this. But as you may remember from my video last year, this was a show I really struggled to enjoy, for a few reasons that I'm going to recap briefly now. So unfortunately, the National Theatre really doesn't platform new musicals or musicals at all as much as it ought to. Now, as I say this, they are about to open finally a new musical called Standing at the Sky's Edge that has had exceptional reviews. I'm so excited about seeing this, and that's fantastic news. But Hex has now appeared at the National Theatre 2 Christmas seasons in a row. And if you didn't know, it is based on an adaptation of Sleeping Beauty that Rufus Norris himself wrote for the Young Vic many years ago, and it now features a score which has been in part written by himself as a lyricist, which is probably the creative contribution to the show that annoyed me the most. The lyrics to the songs are just not good. There's a whole cast recording. You can go and listen to it. I don't know how much has changed between that original recorded version and the version that is playing this year. I haven't been back to see it, because contrary to popular opinion, I am not glutton for punishment. Maybe I will in the coming days if I change my mind, but so far I've not been back. But the lyrics would just articulate the title of the song repeatedly. There's a song called One of These Days, and the chorus is something to the effect of one of these days, huh, ha, huh, one of these days, huh, ha, huh, one of these days, one of these days. Like, that's literally what we're talking about. There's another song called Hi, Hi, Hello. Well, anyway, hi, hi, hello, hi, hi, hello. Like, this is what they do. They just repeat these ideas over and over again. It is not well constructed from a lyrical perspective. It makes me feel as though the people that wrote Hex, among the creative team was Rufus Norris and his wife. That's something right there. It feels as though they don't have the utmost respect for the composition of musical theatre and the artistry behind writing musicals. It feels as though, because it has this pantomime-y kind of a vibe, that that's what they think musical theatre is, that it's that insincere and aimless. And when you listen to really good musical theatre lyrics, which is one of my favourite things, lyric writing, and something I'm really passionate about, you can hear the artistry and how it can articulate character and progress a plot, and none of that is present in Hex whatsoever. The other issue that Hex had when I saw it last year was it was tonally completely confused. Is this a show for kids? Is this a show for adults? Bits of it are traumatizing, bits of it are juvenile. It's not really at all clear who it's aimed at. It's this sort of offbeat, strange fantasy world. It's not completely dissimilar from Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella. And there's this grotesque, nightmare-inducing scene in which Sleeping Beauty's mother-in-law believes that she has eaten her grandchildren because she is a giant or a troll of some description, and she eats babies, and then at the end she just apologizes for this and she feels bad, and they forgive her really remarkably quickly, given the whole supposed infanticide thing. So, you know, it's a strange show. That was a strange show. But sometimes strange and wacky is not the worst thing in the world, and a 2-star strange show like Hex can be a lot more fun than a 1-star show that is just boring. Because next I saw Ava at the Riverside Studios. This show had a longer title. It was Ava : something. I've blocked out half of the title. This was an adaptation of the memoirs of the legendary Hollywood actress Ava Gardner. And this was maybe the first show to open the new venue Riverside Studios, or certainly one of the first shows. Riverside Studios has really established itself as a big off-West End player this year. Operation Mincemeat played there later in the year, and next year it will be hosting the transfer of Winnie the Pooh, the musical. But they started with Ava, and it was starring Elizabeth McGovern of Downton Abbey fame. Now, this was in January last year. I'm seeing Elizabeth McGovern in another play in a few weeks, and I know the play is better, fingers crossed that the whole production is, but I believe she had a hand in adapting Ava Gardner's memoir and playing the role herself, so it confused me and surprised me that she would conceive for herself such an uninteresting part, because even though you have Ava Gardner, this fascinating character with this fascinating history and so much to explore emotionally, it was a two-hander with herself and another actor who played the man who was ghostwriting her memoir, and he in turn transformed into all of the different men in her life. But it became much more about him, because she was very static and one note, and he was transformative and charismatic, and you got to be a chameleon playing these different parts, and she was far less compelling. You know, she did a good caricature of Ava Gardner. It was a nice party piece of an impression, but she didn't really give herself any kind of substantial material to work with, which surprised me given that she had had a hand in the adaptation. The set did some interesting things where we had this kind of system of shutters like a camera lens that moved us between different rooms, but the production was also odd, and it's not the most inherently theatrical space, but you had things like pouring some liquid out of a jug into a glass. I think they were pouring drinks or wine or something, and I don't remember if there was actual liquid on stage, perhaps there wasn't, but they had a sound effect. They had a really loud liquid pouring sound effect that wasn't at all in time with the drinks being poured, and it's those little things that will take you completely out of a production and make it feel amateurish. There was plenty of dialogue that was almost laughable. It was one of those things that was just dull and dragged and really challenging to enjoy. So next we go from a quiet, slow, two-person play to a very loud musical. Hold on to your hats, this one may be controversial, but one of the biggest disappointments for me this year was the UK tour of We Will Rock You. Now, I will preface this by saying that I am really happy when any tour can sell well. And from what I understand, We Will Rock You has been touring the country and selling really well, because there's a whole host of people who maybe wouldn't go to the theatre to see everything, but will go and see We Will Rock You, and that's fantastic. I saw the original London production back in 2007. I believe my dad is a big fan of this show, and my entire family went this year to go and see it on tour, and I was left really disappointed. I actually filmed a whole review vlog for this for my channel, and I felt so conflicted about posting it that it just disappeared completely into the ether, and it has never made its way onto YouTube, but I will articulate some of my thoughts about it now. I think my biggest disappointment was to do with the set, or maybe the direction, or maybe the book. Let's do it one at a time. So the set was very much simplified from the original West End production. You don't have the big thing that was swinging out around the stage. You don't have the same level of grandeur. The costuming was very much simplified. Essentially, you just had what looked very much like an amateur theatre or university production. I have seen many a show that uses that kind of like two-tier scaffolding with a bunch of screens and this curtain behind which you had the band on the upper level. They kept pulling the curtain back to reveal the band at certain points, which was nice, that we were saluting the band and the soloing guitarists got to stand up and have a moment, but that kept happening throughout the show. And this leads me to my next issue, which is that this show, with this direction by the book writer Ben Elton, does not take itself at all seriously. It has no regard for the loose plot that has been foisted onto it in order to justify Queen songs being performed theatrically on stage. Because the same people who wouldn't necessarily go and see just a Queen tribute will go and see amazingly talented vocalists performing Queen songs just because there's a vague plot around it, or because it's a musical. It can appeal to two people at once. The dads who love the music can go with the mums who love musicals, and we get a whole family outing to We Will Rock You. But this show, I don't think it cares that it's a musical. They whip back that curtain every 5 minutes to show you the band. They don't care that they're undercutting the tension of what they're trying to achieve in the plot. They don't even finish the plot, because we get to this strange scenario where he is pulling this guitar out of the wall of a stadium. The whole thing's been completely tongue-in-cheek, but like it's a silly sci-fi parody, and that's fine if you're going to commit to it. But as soon as he pulls the dang guitar out of the wall on the set, they just give up with the end of the plot. Nothing gets resolved. We don't talk about how the villains are vanquished or what anyone goes on to do. You have characters who I believe have been like killed off or imprisoned just strolling back on so that they can sing in the final few Queen numbers, because at that point it just turns into a Queen concert and the audience is so excited to stand up and clap and do all of this stuff that they don't even care. I will say the vocal talent was exceptional, and every time I see We Will Rock You I get like 5 understudies, and I couldn't have been happier, because I had Katie Leiper, I believe is how you pronounce her name, who was highlight performance of the world for me as Killer Queen. She is going into Wicked. I believe she is going to be covering Alphabet, and I am very excited for that already, but she was covering Jenny O'Leary at this performance as Killer Queen, and she was phenomenal. I liked that they had added in for her as the Act 1 finale, The Show Must Go On. I think that's an amazing song. Why would you not put that in a Queen Musical, it's so theatrical. But I had mixed feelings about the fact that they no longer stop the song Don't Stop Me Now, which was the whole joke of it, and they do the whole song because, again, it's a Queen concert, it's not a show anymore, and nothing has to make sense. So We Will Rock You is going to the Coliseum Theatre in London this year, and I do not know if it is the same production, but I have my suspicions that it might be. I'm hopeful it's not. I'm hopeful it's a bigger, more exciting production with a different direction that takes itself a little bit more seriously and is not sci-fi rock pantomime parody, because even a ridiculous script ought to commit to taking itself seriously. So we will wait and see what kind of We Will Rock You ends up at the Coliseum Theatre this summer, but I am anticipating it nervously. It sounded great, and I love Queen's music, but, you know, this just wasn't the one for me. Later that same month, I saw another show that sounded great, but didn't completely win me over. And that was another tour. This time, the show was Little Voice. So I saw this production on one of its earlier tour stops, and I have friends who really enjoyed this, and I have other friends who agreed with me that it wasn't fantastic. I really wanted to like this, and I was excited from the get-go that this was even happening, because I thought Christina Bianco in this role, that makes perfect sense. Bravo to the casting directors or the producers who conceived that idea and who were making it work, because Christina Bianco, if you do not know, and you should know, she is a phenomenal vocal talent and a remarkable stage presence, but she is also an incredible impressionist, and she gives you all of the musical divas. She does a lovely Barbra Streisand and Celine Dion and all of the musical theatre icons as well, and Shirley Bassey and the like. And Little Voice is a show about this girl who has terribly low self-esteem and is incredibly shy, but loves listening to records and emulating these amazing divas that she listens to, and ends up performing and imitating them at a local music venue. And it's this defining moment. And when Christina Bianco is on stage in front of a sparkly curtain doing her thing and doing the impressions and singing, then everything works. It's every other scene in the show that drags horribly. Or should I say dragged horribly, because the tour has now ended. But I would describe this show as 5% Christina Bianco singing and 95% me waiting for Christina Bianco to start singing. It's meant to be a comedy, it's meant to be like a black comedy thing. The particular audience I was in did not laugh at all, so you get that horrible sort of empty feeling. I liked the set, I did, but it's no good having a great set and having a great cast with legitimately funny and brilliant performers who I've enjoyed in other things. It is no good having them on stage when the material just isn't working. I put a lot of this down to the direction, or maybe even to the book itself. I know that this has been produced before. I know that it was beloved on film, but it just didn't work for me. The whole thing felt miserable and cruel, and it was just very difficult to enjoy. I don't know if the script has aged particularly well in its depiction of working class characters, but it just drudged in its unpleasantness, and I didn't want to be watching it for as long as I did. That sounds incredibly cruel of me to say, but the whole thing just came across very difficult to enjoy. Like I said, when Christina Bianco is singing, it's fantastic. But I've seen her do her show at the Edinburgh Fringe. It's more fun to just go and see her in cabaret doing that. You don't need the pretext of a miserable plot surrounding that. But that wasn't the last misery that I would endure in 2022, because another very depressing play was on the horizon. This one was called The Dance of Death. So, The Dance of Death is a play written by August Strindberg, and this was being revived for the Arcola Theatre, starring real-life spouses Lindsay Duncan and Hilton McRae, who gave very good performances. They are very established, excellent actors. I do not have beef with their interpretations of these characters, but this was also not easy to enjoy. I'm going to actually bring up the review that I wrote about this for my blog, because I'm so traumatized I've actually blocked it out. It can only have been a 1 or a 2-star review from me. Let's find out together. How is it taking me this long to type my own name? Here we go. A 2-star review. So, yeah, not the end of the world. I said, this dance of death is a wild waltz that commences with disinterest and concludes with bizarre, unearned ludicrosity. Which is a word I think I may have made up, but if it's not real, it ought to be. Ludicrosity. I said that the playtext provided proved very little help when it came to grappling with this piece's increasingly convoluted plot. It was about a military captain and his wife who were living on an isolated Scandinavian island. As they wearily approached their 30th wedding anniversary, it was very Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, very much ado about nothing. Only here, the malice does not conceal any secret affection for each other, simply a deeper layer of additional malice and misery. The whole thing was very bleak, and the whole thing didn't have much of a plot to be concerned with. You had these two actors sparring with each other as these feuding spouses, launching into these unexpected rants that seemed to come out of nowhere. If there were meant to be justifications for their behaviour and explanations of where these passionate emotions come from, then those were missed, and those are the kind of notes in a direction that will make something more seamless and will make something like this make sense. You had this third character who then got interpreted into the plot in a romantic way that was very confusing and then fled. I believe at the end the whole thing was bizarre and convoluted, and I spent most of the time just trying to wrap my head around what was happening and why. Maybe that's on me. Maybe I just don't get Strindberg. I love Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I love Much Ado About Nothing, but I feel like they have more to say, and this was just bleak and miserable, and I don't get what the point was. I don't get why it was being revived. Again, as I said, all of the actors in this, Lindsay Duncan, Hilton McRae, Emily Bruni, all fantastic. Excellent performances of very, very strange material. So at this point, we're halfway through the year, and believe it or not, one of my most anticipated shows of the year. A new musical I was so excited for, and one that I was so excited to take my boyfriend Aaron to, because I thought he would love it, I thought I would love it, I thought this was going to be a fantastic, magical evening at the theatre. I am talking about 101 Dalmatians at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. So if you've been following me this year, you may remember a little bit of controversy surrounding this review. I wrote this for What's on Stage, and it ended up being published at the weekend. And if you don't know, most of the major critics, their pieces will not go out over the weekend. They won't go out until Monday, and this was a rare Friday press night. So my What's on Stage review went out over the weekend. Everyone else's didn't go out till Monday. And like me, a lot of people were really waiting for this to be a beautiful new musical at Regent's Park. Thought this was going to be lovely and special and wonderful. And so when my review comes out like the first dog that is flown into space at 2 stars, it was not well liked, and I was not appreciated for doing that, and there was a reasonable bit of backlash. But all I have is my integrity and my honesty, and I did not enjoy this show, and no amount of criticism can change my mind about that. This utterly disappointed me. So this was not based on Disney's 101 Dalmatians, this was based on the book. It was a modernization of the book, but in some very strange ways. It was one of my least favourite tropes for modernization, which is to have an influencer villain character, and that's not just because it resembles something that I may do now on the internet, it's because the whole thing was very short-sighted, and it was using influencer buzzwords without really understanding what that means, because really Cruella was more of this Katie Hopkins-esque social commentator character. It didn't really gel well with the plot of 101 Dalmatians, but again, it was the music here that was just as disappointing. This was written by Douglas Hodge, who is an esteemed, wonderful actor who does not have any kind of a track record as a composer. And for the life of me, I do not know why in the UK we fail to uplift or platform or hire any of the brilliant musical theatre composers that we have who have trained and honed their craft and worked for years and produced these beautiful scores. Why instead we will let the artistic director do it, or let this famous actor do it, or let a pop star do it? Why are we not hiring musical theatre composers? And that irks me when you have a show that could have been better if it had had a better score. This score was bland and generic and disappointing. Elements of the design I enjoyed. I thought the set was very creative. Elements of the design were a little bit odd, like the headless dog puppets puppy puppets, that's hard to say. Or the adult dogs who were just front paws and the back paws were made of trousers and the people were standing up in the trousers puppeteering them and it looked like they were doing something very inappropriate to the Dalmatians. But critically, it just didn't move me. I felt no kind of emotional connection with this. I was legitimately confused as to whether we were meant to be rooting for Cruella when she had the big end of Act 1 number and it wasn't framed in the most villainous way. It was this kind of triumphant, defying gravity moment for her, though it sounded weirdly similar to Frozen's Love as an Open Door. I just didn't get any part of what it was trying to do, and it didn't earn a tremendous amount of success for the venue, nor did it sell as well as perhaps they were hoping that it might, which was a huge disappointment for me because I thought this was going to be lovely. Next, we go from Dalmatians to snails with a play called The Snail House. So at the beginning of this video, I was telling you about the current artistic director of the National Theatre, Rufus Norris. Now, a previous holder of that post is Sir Richard Eyre, who is an esteemed veteran director who, for the first time this year, turned his hand to playwriting. He wrote his first play that was produced at the Hampstead Theatre, and this was called The Snail House. And it wasn't awful, it wasn't terrible. For a playwriting debut, you know, it wasn't the worst thing ever written. I think people just expected a lot more of him given the level of theatrical insight that he has as this incredible celebrated director. But this play was disappointing. This was about a family who were feuding amongst themselves at a prestigious event celebrating the father being honoured for his commitment to the health service during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was about COVID, which is something that I still have mixed feelings about whether I want to see on stage or not. But you had this father character who I believe had an affair, and so there was tension between him and the mother, and then you had the son who works for the Conservative government and is very sort of blasé about everything and not really having any principles. And then you have the daughter who is removed from the family because she is committed to Extinction Rebellion and being a climate activist and is sort of diametrically opposed to everything that her family members stand for. So there's a lot of conflict there. Then you have this cleaner character who has a history with the father because he spoke out against her at a trial proceeding to suggest that she may have abused her children, and she didn't. It's this whole weird contrived plot. But where you have a play that is about debate between these different perspectives and political debate and social debate, it's important that the two sides are represented well. And I don't think either side was represented particularly wholeheartedly. But in particular, the climate activist perspective was not portrayed particularly authentically, particularly well, or in a particularly fair light, all things considered. And so it felt a bit like a rigged fight from the beginning. But the other issue with this was that no one was particularly likable. I liked the set. You know, the writing bent over backwards to keep them in that one room, which was not the room where the party was taking place. It felt very forced that we were never able to just go into that room because this isn't television and we couldn't go that way. But none of these characters were likable, and I really wanted for there to be just one character that I was able to enjoy. Again, I believe I reviewed this for What's on Stage. I did. I gave it 3 stars. I wrote, for all their squabbling, and there is plenty, each character falls disappointingly short when it comes to articulating their stances. Worse too is that so much excellent fodder for debate simply goes unmentioned. The neglect of the health service is scarcely discussed, nor, confoundingly, is the morality of the pandemic in any great detail. Even when this altercation melts away to reveal a far more honest exchange about their relationship, we get platitudes in place of progress. And essentially, it's nothing that we haven't seen before on stage. It's disappointing that Sir Richard Eyre would finally write a play, having been in the director's chair for so long, and finally he gets to articulate his thoughts in a play, and it's conversations we've already had, and it's absolutely nothing new. Speaking of which, the next show on this list is a revival, one I saw on tour towards the end of the year. I am talking about Strictly Ballroom. So I posted a video about this not too long ago on my channel. You likely will have already seen this, so I'm not going to go into great detail reminding you why I didn't enjoy this. But it was disappointing to me because I was hoping this was going to fix the show. This was a show that had played in London before. I didn't get to see it the first time round, but many people that I know did, and my friend Sean did, and my boyfriend Aaron did, and they have all spoken to me at length about that version and why they thought it didn't work. And from what I understand, the real main issue there was, despite a fantastic talented cast with people like Johnny Laby and Zizi Stralin, the characters in the show did not sing to articulate their feelings and advance the plot. All of the songs were sung by a character separate to the plot called, I believe, Wally, who was played by Will Young and later by Matt Cardle, I think. Now, from what I can see, the dance was fantastic and the stage was vast and you had these phenomenal talents in the cast, but for whatever reason it didn't really work. So I was optimistic that Craig Revel Horwood would be the right director to understand not only how to put ballroom dance front and center in this show, but also how to understand this offbeat, bizarre Australian comedy, because it's not tonally straightforward. It's really difficult to get right because it is weird and unusual and maybe a little bit subversive at times, but it can be really funny. I really enjoy the film. And like I said in my video review of this, I thought it was, to quote Craig Revel Horwood himself, I thought it was a disaster. The ballroom dance sequences were crowded and hard to follow. The costuming fell short for me. The staging was really disappointed. They felt unnecessarily penned in. When they did sing the songs, they were sung fine, but I didn't think they arrived at the right times in the plot to articulate what the characters were feeling in those moments. I thought they could have been used a lot more effectively just one scene later or just 30 seconds earlier. Everyone was singing at the wrong time and they were just reprising the same few songs over and over again. None of those songs were particularly effective outside of Time After Time when that got used. Some of the direction was laughable. You have the ensemble coming on and going time, 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 and pretending to be clock hands. The whole subplot with Scott's father, the emotional importance of that was undercut by them playing it for laughs. That was really disappointing. You had this amazing section in the middle where Fran's father shows them how to do an authentic paso doble and they all dance at her family home. That was amazing and that was spine-tingling, and there is nothing like that for the rest of the show. There were costume malfunctions, there was just a whole host of issues with Strictly Ballroom on tour. But I've had comments on that YouTube video since of people agreeing with me. I've had comments of people saying they had an amazing time. And I'm really happy when anyone can go to the theatre and enjoy something and have a great time. So yay for you. I am pleased if you went to go see Strictly Ballroom and you loved it. And I'm sad for you if, like me, you left disappointed. Next up was another new production of an existing musical that was trying to fix the flaws of the original. This time it was From Here to Eternity. So once again, I didn't get the chance to see this originally at the Shaftesbury Theatre in the West End, but I have watched the professional recording, and I've watched it again since to remind myself what was so much stronger about the original production. Now, this was revived at a much smaller theatre, the Charing Cross. It was staged in Traverse. It was meant to make it feel more immersive and atmospheric and vital and intense, and it achieves some of those things. But so much of the lush romance of the show has just gone completely because we have lost both of the introductory scenes and the two romantic subplots that make up the show. This is based on a romantic film and all of that is gone. We are left with the war scenes and we are left with the internal politics of this company based on Hawaii waiting to get involved in the war. There were moments of it that were staged really effectively and really well, and there were a lot of other moments where we're just moving around boxes because we can't obscure sight lines, and it was, in many places, not a patch on the stunning original staging and choreography of songs like Fight the Fight and G Company Blues. And a small off-West End revival is never going to be able to achieve the same things as the original West End production with a much bigger budget, with a much bigger cast. But what you have to be is resourceful and innovative, and it was that level of ingenuity and creativity that I was missing from the direction on this version. But mostly, my issue with this version of the show was that I think they butchered the material, if I'm being perfectly honest. We had the original introduction gone completely. The two female characters in the show, the two female love interests, I should say, had really reduced roles. The female ensemble is gone, so we lost the whole bar scene. We lost the impact of the song The Boys of 41. The song More Than America is gone completely. The two best songs in the score, Run Along Joe and Fight the Fight, were moved to the second act, which completely robbed them of their potency. It just completely not as effective a version of the show and the material whatsoever. I really hope they revert to the original version of the show and just market it differently, because honestly, that could have been much more successful than it was. They didn't need to make these changes to try and fix it. It's so frustrating to me when creatives change their work in this way because they think that's what's going to make it better, and you end up with a far reduced product. So this brings us up to the very last show on my list, number 10 of my theatrical disappointments of 2022, and this takes us to the last few weeks of the year. So I already told you in my last video that I journeyed up to Salford to the Lowry for the very first time, and in the evening I saw one of my favourite plays of the year, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. But in the afternoon I had seen a matinee of one of my least favourites, Claus the Musical. So I actually was asked to review this show for the Baum Bugle, which is a magazine about the works of L. Frank Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz and also The Adventures of Santa Claus, which has been adapted for Claus the Musical. And this show was not one of my favourites. I believe I settled on a 2-star review for that publication. I didn't put it on my own website and I didn't want to shout too loudly about it, but at the same time it frustrates me when you have shows that are marketed towards families and children, because especially during a cost of living crisis, that's so much more in ticket costs. You're a family having to buy more tickets to come and see something, and I think family shows have a real responsibility to deliver a quality product. It's worth saying, a lot of fault here lies in the material itself, and by that I mean the book. It's an odd story. I think I was expecting something like Gregory Maguire's Wicked, that was going to show us the backstory of Santa Claus and give us those little moments where we see like the outfit for the first time, or find out why he's based where he is, or how he comes upon the sleigh and the reindeer, the little details of his character. And almost none of that emerges until like the last 10 minutes of the show. What we have instead is a very strange fantasy plot that's occasionally a little bit biblical. And it was during the second act of the show when Claus, who was played very nicely, I will say, by Harry Winchester. He's singing a sad song lamenting the death of his talking lioness friend Shigra, who was a casualty of the war between the fantasy races that was trying to free him from imprisonment because he'd been captured by some mysterious, occasionally invisible nightmare monsters who end up being elves. Like, the whole thing is odd. It is very, very bizarre. But the musical does not heighten the material or bring the best out of it. You have, again, these lyrics that just aren't fantastic. Claus sings a song about saving the children or giving back to the children, and there were these ensemble harmony lines underneath where they're singing backing vocals, and the lines that they are singing, the lyrics that they are singing, are just a little insincere or a little laughable in their construction, and it doesn't really help you to take the whole thing seriously. I presume that it's meant to be for children. It feels as though it's for children, but a lot of the themes and a lot of the conversations that it's having are a lot more contrived and complex, and so I don't know how easy it would be for children to enjoy. It was another show where nothing was really funny throughout. Nobody laughed the entire time, which is always a bit of an awkward vibe at the theatre. You start to get a sense after a while and you look around and you think, has anyone laughed this whole time? Is anyone smiling? It just wasn't fun and uplifting and everything that a Christmas show should be. If you're offering a Christmas show, it's usually as an alternative to pantomime. We want to laugh, we want to smile, we want to feel the joy of the festive season, and none of that happened, sadly, in Claus the Musical. But those have been my biggest theatrical disappointments of 2022. I don't enjoy making this kind of content. It's much more fun to sit here and passionately tell you about the kind of theatre that I really loved. But like I said, I think this is also an important conversation to have. I think that a lot of these misfires indicate things that we and the creatives involved and the theatre community at large can learn from. I think we need to look into these productions to understand why I didn't connect with them, why others may not have connected with them. And like I said, this is also just my own opinion. I do not speak for everyone. I am not a monolith, and theatre is incredibly subjective. So I would love to hear from you in the comment section down below. Did you feel similarly about these productions, or did you enjoy these productions? If I've talked about a show you really loved this year and said I didn't enjoy it, let us know in the comment section why you loved that show. I would love it if we could get some different perspectives to mine in the comment section to advocate for some of these pieces of theatre. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my Stagey YouTube channel for plenty more videos coming very soon, including one about the shows I'm most looking forward to in 2023 that hopefully don't end up on my disappointments list at the end of the year. But we will find out. We will see together. And to find out, you have to be subscribed. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!